Okay, thank you all for joining us. This week is Parshah Vayeshev on page 198 in the blue Art Scroll Chumash, the stone Chumash, page 198. For those that are joining us on Zoom, thanks for joining us on Zoom. For those that are here in person, we love it when people are here in person. Okay, so this week's Parsha, I'm just going to go over the storyline very quickly. It's just one long storyline, and there's a lot to dissect in this week's parsha. It's jam-packed, just like every parsha, but there's a lot of famous stories in this week's parsha, and we're not going to get through all of it, of course, but we're going to try to pick on a few this year and expand on it. So Yaakov, after his whole encounter with Esav and then with the people in Shechem, with his daughter Dinah from last week's parsha, right? Finally, he returns back to the land of Israel. It says, Vayeshev Yaakov sat in the land of Canaan, where his father lived. He went back to where his father was, right? And then it goes and speaks about the children, bless you, speaks about the children of Yaakov, right? Yosef and Binyamin and his other children, right? But the first story that it speaks about is about Yosef being his favorite, right? He made him a special technicolor coat, like a multicolored coat, and that his brothers felt that their father loved him more. And then also about the whole episode of Yosef and his brothers, where he said that he had these dreams, how everybody's going to bend down to him. One dream was with haystacks, right? All of the haystacks bend down to his haystack. The other one was the stars and the sun and the moon, and everybody bowed down to him, right? Going back and forth, we're just giving a very superficial, quick overview of the parsha, right? And then Yaakov said, how can it be the moon? The moon represents the mother. Your mother's dead. Rachel, last week's parsha, died, right? Commentaries tell us it's referring to Leah because Leah sort of became his surrogate mother, like sort of took over as being a mother, right? And then it reached such a climax where his brothers really hated him, really couldn't speak to him, in peace. So we'll expand on that, what that means. Yeah, his brothers were grazing in the area around Shechem, right, with their cattle. And Yaakov told Yosef to go see how his brothers are doing in Shechem. So even though Yosef knew that there was a little animosity between him and his brothers, he still went and he followed his father's directive. And there's some interesting, the Torah mentions a few things about his travel there, which we're not going to get into. And then he gets there and says two brothers, which some say was Shimon and Levi, same ones that wiped out Shechem, said, oh, here's the dreamer, right? And they made a decision that they were going to, what should we do with him? So they threw him into a pit. Right? They threw him into a pit. Then they decided, Yehuda said, what are we going to gain by keeping him in the pit? So they sold him to slavery to the Midyanim, to Ishmaelim to Midyanim. Right? The whole back and forth, the whole interesting essays that are written about the Torah going into details of who he was sold to and the order that he was sold to. Right? We're not going to get into that, but something to reflect on and to think about. What's the importance of the order of who he was sold to? Yosef then sold to Mitzrayim. They took his special garment that Yaakov made for him, and they put it in the blood, and they brought it to Yaakov, and he says, oh no, it looks like a wild animal. Got to him, and Yaakov was in mourning for his son. The Torah takes a little, then it says that Yosef was sold to Egypt. Torah takes a little break, goes to the story of Yehuda, right? Yehuda, the fourth of the brothers, who was also the leader of the Jews, of the tribes at the time, right? He sort of puts himself in self-exile. We'll expand on that a little bit. Why? Right? Then there's a whole very interesting story. He marries this Canaanist, right? This lady from the local lands. He has 3 children. He finds a wife for his eldest son, Tamar, right? And he was bad in the eyes of God, and he dies. So Yehuda then takes his next son and gives him to Tamar, and he's also bad in the eyes of God, and goes into details what their bad was, and we're not going to go into that. And he also dies. So the third son said, hey, I'm not interested in her. She's like a black widow over here, right? Like, what am I doing over here? Right? So Yehuda said, okay, well, let's just wait until he gets older, right? And she went back to her family. But then she heard that Yehuda was traveling on the road, right? Again, it was grazing time. It was She took off her clothes of mourner and she put on like regular clothes. It says she revealed her face and she went on to the sort of the pathways, the corners of like intersections, and she acted like a prostitute sort of. And Yehuda was passing by and she had relations with Yehuda. And she asked for payments. He gave her. He didn't have any payments. He gave her his stick, his seal, right? And one other thing, I forgot what it was, right? And he was going to send payment, but of course, when he went to send payment, there was no one there. What's going on here? These are very deep ideas. I don't know if we're going to have time to go into this today, right? It's just important just to know that there's a lot of depth going on here. This isn't we're not talking about just regular you and me, just regular people. We're talking about Judah. We're talking about Tamar, right? And there's a lot of conversation. Why did it happen to happen this way? Just very quickly, there was no halachic issue going on before the Torah. There was no prohibition of having relations with a single person as long as they consented. If both people were single, there was no prohibition. There's no decree or anything like this. Just to throw that out again. I don't know if we're going to have time to go into detail. There's a lot that's written on this, and it's important to get the right hashkafa, the right philosophy, and the right way of looking at it. Always remember that whatever is written in the Torah, whatever is talking about righteous people, especially the tribes, right, where there's deep things going on here, a lot of deeper things that are going on here. But to make a long story short, he finds out she's pregnant. Right? He says, okay, it was just a stranger, right? So then she was sort of still connected to his wife, so she was going to be burnt, right? But then she said, whoever these stuff are meant for me. That's what I had, and he recognized it, and he realized it was his, right? So therefore, he admitted to it, and then they had two children who were the descendants of Judah, who were going to be who Mashiach and King David came from, right? What's the difference between him and a regular stranger? There's a concept, a mitzvah of yibum, right? A mitzvah of yibum where one has to, if a husband dies and there's no children, the wife's to marry a brother. Now, this is before the Torah was given, but there's still some kind of connection. So it could be anybody in the family, right? So she couldn't have relations with a stranger because sort of still connected to this family, right? But since it was Yehuda, it was part of the family. So therefore, that was considered okay. And again, I'm saying giving a very quick, superficial, very quick overview. There's a lot of depth just to go into this. And then the Torah goes and goes back to Yosef, right, and speaks about how Yosef was sold to Potiphar, right, and how he was very successful, and he was so successful that everything in the house was run by him. And then Torah speaks about how his wife wanted to have relations with him, right, and there's one day that no one was around, and she claimed to be sick. He came to the house, not knowing that she was there. She wanted to have relations, right? He ran away. She held on to his shirt, and she started crying, look, the slave, he tried to rape me, right? And they believed him, and they threw him into jail. He was in jail. He was again successful, and the one in charge of the jail let him run the show. Two servants of Paro, the Shar Mashkin, Sarhofim, the head of the drinks and the head of the baker, were thrown into jail, right, for doing something wrong. They had a dream, and Yosef interpreted the dream. Maybe we'll go into the dream a little bit if we have time, right? The head of the wine, he will be put back in his place. The head of the baker, right? The baker his head will be chopped off in Paro's 3 days, Paro's birthday, and that's what happened. Yosef asked the guy to, please, Shar Tabachim, please, remember me. I was a slave. Of course, he forgets him, and that's the end of the parsha. Right? So it's really sort of one long story, right? It reads as a story. It sounds like it could be a good movie, right? There's everything in there, from hatreds of siblings to ups and downs, and it just sounds like it could be a wonderful story. There's a lot of depth going on here, and I just sort of wanted to very quickly first give like the whole overview. We're going to go into some of the things, but again, it's important to remember that we're not talking about me and you. We're talking about the tribes. We're talking about very spiritual people, and the Torah reveals whatever the Torah tells us is for a reason. It's not just for a storyline and to make it a little more exciting because it's not because to sell books, right? Kind of thing, right? Whatever the Torah tells us, there's lessons to be learned. There's deep Kabbalistic concepts behind it. It's a source of everything in the world. So it's always important to remember that. So now let's go back to the beginning of the parsha. We're going to start slowly but surely going through some things, right, and delving into the parsha. So it says, Vayeshev Yaakov, and Yaakov sat, right? So if you remember last week's parsha, we spoke about the difference between Vayeshev, sitting, and Garti, and Lagur, and to dwell, right? So sitting is a permanent sitting, right? And Lagur means a temporary. We spoke about last week that in the Edja we are temporary, and that's what he did by Lavan. But now he's sitting, right, in a permanent setting because now he's by his father's house and he's in Eretz Yisrael. But the commentaries expand on this. Rashi says something very interesting. It says that, and it actually quotes the Midrash and the Talmud. And when it says Vayeshev Yaakov sat, there's another thing that Yaakov wanted to sit b'shalva. He wanted to sit in peace. Finally, he had a hard life, right? His brother was chasing him. He had to run away. His father-in-law swindled him and made him work longer. And then afterwards, his brother comes back. Okay, finally, his brother's changed his mind. His daughter gets abducted and molested. His two children go out and wipe out a whole city. Like, come on. Like, he had a lot going on in his life. Right? He didn't have an easy life, right? So finally, he gets to his father's house, finally get back to Eretz Yisrael. He just wants to sit in peace and to learn Torah and to not have any problems. And it says that Yaakov wanted to sit in peace, and the Elah told us, and then the whole story of Yosef happened, and being sold into Egypt and back to the hardships. Right? So the commentaries ask, what was wrong with Yaakov wanting to sit in peace? Like what was wrong with that? It's like, seems like it was a bad thing. Like, there's many different ideas, right, that are said. Rav Moshe Feinstein said something very interesting. Rav Moshe Feinstein says that there's nothing wrong with wanting to sit in peace. We ask for shalom, we ask for peace all the time. It not always happens, right? There's nothing wrong with wanting it. But, and again, we're talking about Yaakov Avinu on his level, right? And for us to learn from. But what it means to say that Yaakov wanted to sit in peace, he wanted to sit in peace. His children were getting older. Yosef was 17 already, right? Binyamin was a few years younger. Right? Not much, right? The other ones were in their 20s already. We're not talking about little kids. We're talking about, 20-year-olds, high teens. So he felt like, okay, now I could finally, let them go off on their own. I don't have to worry about their education anymore so much. I could sit in peace. I can focus on myself. I can focus on my learning, right? So I said, no, you always have to worry about your kids' education. Right? You always have to be concerned on where your kids are holding or what they're doing. It doesn't make a difference how old they are. It doesn't make a difference where they're holding. You always have to have a understanding of them. You have to have, it's not, you can't be a helicopter parent, right? And as they get older, but it's still important to be in tune with them, to have a relationship with them, to know where they're holding. Right? And therefore, again, we're talking about Yaakov's level, but Yaakov wanted to sort of have this piece of not having to worry about that anymore. Sort of, one could say, we have to be delicate with our words, sort of, let the situation happen, but not being on top of the situation. Right? Sort of, again, we have to be careful how we talk, but on Yaakov's level, right? And that's a lesson for us, right? Moshe Feinstein says that we always have to be careful. It doesn't make a difference how old our kids are. Right? It doesn't make a difference. We always have to, be in tune and be in touch and ask them how they're doing and see how we can help. And as the older they get, we have to be careful. We can't tell them what to do anymore, but we have to be in tune and see how they're doing and never feel like, okay, I'm done. Now I can go to the Bahamas. Now I don't have to worry about it anymore. Now I can just let them do their own thing. It's not like that. It doesn't make a difference how old you are, right? It's not like that. So that's one idea that Moshe Feinstein says that I think is a very powerful thought. Any questions or comments? Okay, so let's continue. Says, so the second verse says, verse 2 says, Elah told us Yaakov, these are the descendants of Yaakov. We should be familiar with this already. We had this Elah told us Noach, right? We had Elah told us Avraham, we have Elah told us Yitzchak. We had this already a few times, right? So what does it tell you? Elah told us Yaakov, these are the descendants. So what should have said? The 12 tribes, right? He had 12 tribes. What does the Torah tell us? Yosef ben Shvash, Yosef was 17. These are descendants of Yaakov, Yosef. Only Yosef. Well, why was Yosef picked? Like, why not Reuven, not Shimon? Why not Elatolis Yaakov? These are the descendants of Yaakov. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. And later on, it does say that. It goes through the tribes, right? It does do that in other times. Why over here does it say pick out Yosef and then go into Yosef? Yosef was 17 years old, right? And right? And he was a shepherd with his brothers, right? And he was a nar. He was more of a, he was 17. He was more like a child, sort of, right? With youthful, with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. Those are the maidservants. Now, don't forget, they're older than him. Don't forget. Even though they're the sons, and he says he was playful, but they were older than him by a few years, right? So why is it picking on Yosef? So there's many different ideas, many different thoughts. I just want to share one thought about this, and is that as we said in the past, when it speaks to Ela told us these are the descendants, it doesn't necessarily mean your descendants doesn't mean to say your actual children. Right? It doesn't always, as we've seen before. The Ela told us Noach is tzaddik. Noach was a righteous person, right? We find this many times in the Torah that it's referring to that these are sort of the legacy. These are your so over here for these parshas later on it's going to say all the 12. But what is starting this story of Yaakov, right? This whole episode of going to Egypt and the whole episode with the children being thrown with the children, and then you're going down, was Yosef. Was Yosef. Yosef was the center of this whole story. Right? So these are the descendants of Yaakov, Yosef. Yosef was the center of this whole story, but Yosef is the center of this whole story because, right, as we're going to see, Vayav Yosef is the Yisrael Avis Yosef Mikabanav. Yisrael love, that's verse 3. On verse 3 it says that Yisrael Oev, right? We spoke about this last week. Interchangeable. Sometimes it says Yaakov, sometimes it says Yisrael. We spoke about that last week. Listen to the recording, right? But Yisrael, obviously Yosef, Yisrael loved Yosef, Mikal Acha, from all his brothers. He because he was his youngest, even though he wasn't really his youngest. Benjamin was his youngest. I mean to say, but he was the youngest. He was his first from Rachel, right? He was his beloved wife's first child, right? So he had this extra love for him, right? So this whole extra love that he had, and the Rashi says that, and the Talmud tells us that he taught him all his Torah. Right? Of course, he taught all his children Torah, but he sort of like had this special chavrusa with him and special time with him. Right? So this whole thing, as Yosef sort of being his descendant, right, his like one that he hung out with, and that he stayed with him the whole time. That's what brought on this whole episode, and that's why it says Ela tolis Yaakov Yosef. Right? Meaning to say that this whole episode, this whole thing of Yaakov sort of showing favoritism to Yosef and trying to protect him and learning extra with him, that's what made this whole episode happen. Because it says in the next story, right? Verse 4 says, and his brothers saw, Ki oso av mikol achav, they saw that he loved him from all his brothers, but yisnu also, they hated him. And they couldn't talk to him with peace. Right, so this is sort of laying the groundwork to everything that's going to happen, and that's what it says. Ela tolis Yaakov Yosef means to say this whole episode, the whole legacy of Yaakov moving forward from here, of all this, the next troubles and going to Mitzrayim and everything like that, was because of Yosef, because of his relationship with Yosef, where he liked Yosef more than his brothers. Right, so that's to answer that. But now there's a few things that we have to break down. What does it mean that Yaakov liked Yosef more than everybody else, right? And what does it mean? It's because of a little jealousy, because he showed a little favoritism. Again, we're talking about the 12 tribes. We're not talking about just regular people, right? But Yeruachim and his brothers saw, right? So therefore, so they hate him. What is a little like jealousy? Like this is just regular good old jealousy? We're talking about the tribes. We're not putting his name on them. We're not talking about little people over here, right? So what's going on over here? Why were they jealous? Because of a little extra love that Yaakov, he was just the youngest child, okay. So, I mean, my kids know I love all of my kids, right? That's my Ezzy, he's my baby, right? Okay, he's my baby. He's my baby boy, right? Yes, Jennifer, right? That's my baby boy, right? Of course I love all my kids, right? But they're not going to, oh, look, he spends, They say, okay, Daddy, you have more pictures of Ezzy on your phone than anybody else. I don't know if that's so true, but maybe, right? But what's going on over here? Like, needs a lot of explanation. So before we explain, before we go into and give an explanation, there's many different ideas, but before we go into that, there is a tremendous lesson that the Torah is trying to teach us. And again, we're talking about on Yaakov's level, we're talking about the tribe's level, and there's deep things going on here, right? But whatever it is, the Torah is teaching us that how careful we have to be, right? That how careful we have to be not to allow your affection for your children, or one in particular, or if it's a student in a class, or if it's a group of friends, to be that the other people realize how much you like this person more than the other ones. Right? It says he liked him, and then it says Vayiru Achiv, his brothers saw Akio. They saw it. They not just felt it. They saw it. They're learning extra time with him, whatever it is. Again, we have to explain it. We're talking about the Shvatim. We're talking about Yaakov Avinu, right? But the words of the Torah still teach us this important lesson: how careful we have to be, right? That people get slighted, right? People get slighted. Even if you don't, I don't mean it. I love all my kids. I don't mean it. Of course I love everyone. But at the end of the day, there's still certain things certain actions that happen, right? That this one, you go to this one more often for Yom Tov, or you go for, this one, you take them out for ice cream more, or take her out for ice cream more, right? Whatever it is, whatever stage of the game they're on. And like we said before, it doesn't make a difference how old they are. Right? You have to be careful to make sure that it's not evident, right? Even if maybe there is a little more. Okay, each child, as parents, it's certain kids you feel a little more connected. And you love all your kids, of course, tremendously, but you might, the personalities might feel a little better. It doesn't mean to say you love them more than the others, but sometimes the actions that you do might affect them and make the other ones feel that way. How careful we have to be, right? Because of that, they felt that way, and Yaakov wasn't sensitive. Again, we're talking about on Yaakov's level. We have to be careful how we talk, right? But Yaakov wasn't sensitive to that, and they were able to feel that and see it, right? The whole episode of Yosef being sold, right, happened because of that. So how careful we have to be. So that's an important lesson that we have to learn. But the question we have to figure out what's going on, and this is a really deep question of what's going on between Yosef and his brothers, right? Yaakov, we could say he didn't mean it, right? And that's a lesson we have to learn, right? It was his youngest, he of course he loved all his kids, and we're going to see later. He said, really, the dream, right? That your mother's not around. He sort of, right? And he knew that there was something special about Yosef. So we could leave that, I don't think that's such a hard question. But the question is with the brothers, like, what was the whole anger? And then that they go and they throw him into they throw him into a pit, or they sell him all the way down there. This needs explanation. So we're gonna talk about this idea, because I want to talk about this idea. And again, there's a lot of verses in between, but this is an important idea that's sort of a theme in this week's parsha, that we have to talk about. So there's a very interesting thing. It says that Yaakov, the verses say that Yaakov, Yosef, the verse before says, "V'yehav Yosef as dibasim ra lavim." He brought the dibasim ra, bad words to his father, right? He brought these bad words, right, to his father. What's the basam ra? Okay, right? What's these bad words that he brought? Snitching, right? Like little kids, like, and again, we're not talking about 5-year-olds, right? Like, what's going on over here, right? And then it says the next verse. It says, they couldn't speak to him in peace. There was sort of something really deep going on over here, right? That they couldn't talk to him. They couldn't speak. And later on in verse 20, right? Later on they say, right? Right? The verse. This is the dreamer of 19. Right? He comes. Let's kill him and let's see what happens to his dreams. Right? This is very like what? Right, we're going to kill him. Let's see what happens. He had dreams, right? The next verse is he had dreams, like we spoke about, right? So his dream made it sound like he's on top of them. Okay, so let's kill him and let's see what happens in his dreams. So, so it's very interesting. The basam ra, these bad words, as it says in verse 2, the Balaturim, I'm just going to bring it out this way. It's just something cute, but it's not just cute. It's Torah. The Balaturim, a commentary on the Torah, says that the numerical value of the basam ra is 721, which is the same numerical value as shehem achlu evrim menachai, that they ate Aver Menachai. What is Aver Menachai? Aver Menachai is eating eating flesh from an animal that's still alive, right? Eating flesh from an animal, that's still alive, which is a prohibition in the Torah. It's a prohibition for a ben noach, for a noahide also, right? You're not allowed to eat from an animal that's alive, right? Even if you cut it off, right? You cut it off, you can't eat it, right? You have to first. For a Jew, you have to shecht it, right? And then only after it's shechted can you eat it. And for a non-Jew, it has to be dead, right? It has to be dead, right? Before you can eat from it. So Yosef, the Basim Ram, Yosef told his father, it wasn't stam, they're picking on me, they stuck their, or they did this, or they stayed out later than they were supposed to. Right? No, Yosef was really concerned. He was concerned that he saw that his siblings were eating Aver Menachai. They were eating from an animal while the animal's still alive, not from the animal. So they cut a piece off and they're eating from the animal that was still alive, and that's a prohibition, right? That's a prohibition. So he went to his father and said, "Look what's going on. We have to take care of them. It's for their good. Yeah, you have to teach them." They were like, "Hello, what's going on over here?" So the question is, really, we're talking about the 12 tribes. They ate from the live. How could it be? It's a prohibition in the Torah, right? Or even a Noahide is not allowed to do that, right? So this really opens up a fascinating discussion, which I want to spend a little time on, because again, this is something that really gives us a mindset, and we're gonna on this story, and every story there's new depth to it, right? But there's a sefer called Parshas Drachim, a sefer, a Jewish book. It's called Parshas Drachim, written in 1600s, somewhere like that, 16th, 17th century. And he has essays. It's essays about different topics of the Torah. And one of his essays is a fascinating discussion, and you might have heard this before. The children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right, and the tribes, before receiving the Torah, they have the status of a ben Noach, of a Noahide. Or since they kept the Torah, right? We know that they kept the Torah, even though before the Torah was brought down to this earth, they still knew about the Torah. Or since they kept the Torah, they had a status of like what a Jew would be after the giving of the Torah. It's interesting. There's a discussion, a debate about what their status was during that time. It was before the Torah was given, but they were still alive. God still said that you're going to be the chosen ones, right? You're going to go into this, and He gave them still gave them gave them certain commandments, and more than a Noahide. So what was their status? And it's machlokas, and there's proofs this way and proofs that way. And it's a fascinating. He has an essay with probably about 30 pages. Right, double-sided, going back and forth, and different opinions and different things. Fascinating, right, Talmudic discussion. But one of those, and during one of those discussions, he speaks about our story over here. He says, through this discussion, we can understand what's going on over here. Yosef and his brothers were not bickering over who could get to drive the car, right? And who could get the inheritance, or who was responsible to take out the garbage. Right? That's not what they were bickering about. What they were arguing about was Torah, right? They were arguing about spirituality, right? They were having a discussion, an argument of what was their status? Were they considered a Ben Noah, or were they considered like a Jew? And what's the difference? Fascinating. Hear this. The Talmud tells us, right, that that if an animal is slaughtered, right, for a Jew, an animal is slaughtered, and the animal sort of still moving, right? But since the animal is slaughtered, you're allowed to eat from that animal. You're allowed to eat a piece from that animal. Because even though it's sort of still moving and blood still whatever, but if you clean that piece out, it's slaughtered. And for a Jew, you have to slaughter the animal, and then you can eat the animal. But for a Noahide, right, the animal has to be dead. Right, the animal it's not just being slaughtered, right? If you slaughter it or you kill it, but it's still sort of jumping around, right? It's still moving around, that's not considered the animal is fully dead yet, right? So that will be a prohibition of eating from Evim and Achai, if you eat from it, right? Another interesting, fascinating halachic difference, right? Fascinating, and this is a glimpse in the beauty of the Torah and the depth of the Torah. And every situation is its own unique thing. If a mother is pregnant, a baby has a baby in its stomach, and you slaughter the animal, right? What's the status of the baby? Right? What's the status of the baby? There's a baby, then you open it up, and the baby's still alive, right? If you open it right away, the baby can still be alive. Does the baby need to be slaughtered also to be able to eat, or not? Right? So there's an opinion in the Talmud that holds a no, that since Yarach the baby is considered part of the mother, right? When it's in the mother, it's considered part of the mother. Right? So therefore, when you slaughtered the mother, right, the baby had considered, and there's a deep Talmudic discussion, and I'm giving you the quick overview of it. There's depth and commentaries elaborate on this, right? But the baby now is considered that it accomplished the mitzvah of shechita, of slaughtering the animal, being in the mother's stomach. Since the baby is considered part of the mother, it's feeding from the mother, it's attached to the mother, it's considered part of the mother. It's alive, right? But it's considered part of the mother. So therefore, there's an opinion that holds that the slaughter, the shechita that happened for the mother, works for the baby, and therefore you could take a piece and eat that piece from the baby, right? You could take it. You can take a piece and eat it from the baby. Now, I don't recommend it, right? It might not be humane, right? But you can take a piece and eat it from the baby, even without slaughtering it, right? Because it has the halachic aspect of being slaughtered, where a non-Jew is not allowed, because again, a non-Jew doesn't have the mitzvah of shechita, doesn't have the mitzvah of slaughtering. For a non-Jew, it has to be that the animal is dead. Right? So it doesn't make a difference that the mother is dead. It doesn't make a difference that the baby was in the mother when it died, but this now is a living creature. Right? So therefore, it still has a prohibition of Evim and Achai. There might be other prohibitions, but it has a prohibition of Evim and Achai. Therefore, says the Parshas Drachim, that was a disagreement between Yosef and his brothers. Yosef felt that they were still considered like Noahites. Right? They didn't receive the Torah yet. Yes, they kept the mitzvot, but they were only keeping the mitzvot out of wanting to get closer to Hashem, but it doesn't mean to say that they were allowed to have the leniencies of what it would be if you were a Jew for the shechita, because they still had the laws of a Noahide. And therefore, he felt that they ate Evim and Achai, and therefore he went and he brought these words to his father. He says, Tata, right? Oh no, my kids, my brothers are eating Evim and Achai. That's prohibition because we're like Noahides. And they felt no. They said, no, we're the children of Abraham and Yaakov. God promised us this land. God tells us we're going to be His chosen people. We know that we're going to receive the Torah, so we're considered like Jews, and therefore we're not considered like we're eating Evim and Achai. Right? And there's a halachic debate and discussion about what's going on. Right? And therefore, of course, we're not talking about little kids bickering about things, or big kids bicker about worse things usually, right? But bickering about things, right? We're talking about a halachic disagreement that they had, and that Yosef wasn't just tattletaling; he was having a discussion with his father about the bad things that he felt they were literally doing things that deserved that, and they felt, right? And again, there's some other things that he felt that they did based off, again, with the same thought that if you're a Noahide, you're allowed, and I'm not going to go into all of it, but beautiful essay, right? And they felt that, no, by him feeling this way, by him going and telling his father, because he felt that since they were eating Evim and Achai, that's a punishment of death, and therefore they felt that they were deserving the punishment. So they felt that he was a rodef. What is a rodef? Someone that's out to kill you, you have to kill him first. All right, so they felt that they have to take care of him. That's what it said. Let's see what happens to his dreams. Like his dreams, they interpreted his dreams by saying, look, I'm going to be your ruler. I'm going to be the one that spites you down. You're going to bend down to me, and I'm right, and this is the way to do it. Right? this halacha thing, so they felt that they were in danger, and therefore they had to take care of him. So they put him into the pit. And Yehuda said, what are we going to gain by that? Let's just sell him and get him out of our lives. So he's still our brother, right? And that gives a whole new interpretation, right, of this whole story. It wasn't brothers and just bickering and fighting and, oh, he's getting in our way, let's kill him, this and that. We're talking about the 12 tribes. And again, it still needs more fine-tuning, right? But it's a direction, a way of looking at the story, right? Of the Torah is telling us, understanding that this is based off Torah, it's based off a spiritual thing, and they had reasons why they felt what they had to do it. It wasn't just brothers and sisters, brothers just bickering and fighting, and that leads to such an extreme thing. And so it opens up our minds to say that, again, number one, there's depth to the Torah, right, that we can't even sometimes comprehend, that we need to open up our minds and our eyes to see, right, different views, different ways of looking at it. And it also gives us a better understanding that we're not talking about, just regular siblings having a rivalry and they can't talk to each other and they can't. And now we understand what they said. They can't talk to them in peace. They say they felt that he was out to kill them. Right? Halakhically, they knew that he felt that halakhically. It wasn't like they knew that it was a personal thing. Right? So they couldn't communicate anymore. Right, and that's a new explanation. It's not new; it's old, right? But it's a new explanation to try to open up this whole episode, this whole thing of Yosef and his brothers, right? And to give it a new light. Any questions or comments? Right? I know this is something new, or maybe you've heard this before, right? But it's a deep thought, right? It's a lot of different moving pieces. But any questions or comments? Anybody? Okay, so let's move on. And now we're going to go back into some of the verses that we sort of gave an overview on this whole episode to explain, but I just want to go through some of the verses. So Rashi says, right, on verse, when it says, they couldn't speak to him with peace. So Rashi says the reason why is because they didn't want to be echad bepev ve'echad belev. It means to say they didn't want to be, they had this hatred. It means to say a spiritual hatred, as we just explained. So therefore they didn't want to be, fakers, as we call it. Oh, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Right? They didn't want to be echad bepev ve'echad belev, right? And they also they were around their father, so they also want to be respectful. Not to talk in a negative way. Also, you have to be careful. Just because you want to say something, right, doesn't mean to say everything that you want to say is supposed to be coming out. So therefore, since they couldn't speak to him in peace, they had only harsh things to say to him, right? So therefore, they didn't say anything, right? They didn't say anything, and this teaches a tremendous lesson that, number one, we have to be very careful not to fake things. I say one thing, I mean another thing, I act in a certain way, I mean a different thing, right? It's very important. Now, if you're doing it, acting in a certain way to sort of try to elevate yourself, that's something else. Chatsonius or the pneumius is a concept that the external actions that we do elevate our inside. So I want to grow. I'm not holding there yet. I want to. So I'm gonna talk about how I want to start keeping Shabbos. I'm gonna talk about how I want to start wearing a kippah. I'm gonna talk about how I want to start coming to shul. I'm gonna talk about how I want to start. So that's good because you want to do it, and even so you go to shul a little bit. It's part of the actions that we're doing to grow. That's a positive thing. But when it's you're not at all, and especially if it's a negative thing. I mean, I'm not interested in growing, but I just want to look a certain way. So therefore, I'm going to pretend to be a certain way for a certain time, or that's not a healthy thing, because then you're just confusing yourself, and you're never going to grow because you're pretending to be something, but you're not really want to be that thing. You're never going to grow. Be the way you are, right? And then when you're ready to start growing, you realize that, hey, I don't like the way I am, right? Then you have an opportunity to grow. And that's the same thing over here, the way they spoke, right? They don't want to be echad bepev, echad belev, speak one way and mean something else. But at the same time, they didn't say anything because they're also respectful not to talk in a negative way. And that's also a very powerful thing to think about. Okay, so let's move on over here. There's another very interesting discussion that's going on over here. Right. Let's talk about this. This class today is going to talk about some deep ideas, right? Some deep ideas that are hidden in this week's Torah portion. So if you jump to, so they said the dreamer is coming, like we spoke about. If you jump to verse 21, right? 21, so it says, "Vayom alem Ruvain," right? It says, "Vayishma Ruvain." Reuben heard what he wants. Vayitzalam biyadem, he saved them, right? He saved them from their hands. It says, why should we kill someone? So, and then what does it say? It says that he said to, they said, they threw him into the pit. The pit is empty and there's no water in there. And then it says that they went back and eat bread. Right? But it says that Reuven wanted to he saved them from them. The Torah tells us that Reuven's intention was to save him, right? To save Yosef from them, and then he goes and throws him into a pit. Right? Now, the Torah tells us, the Talmud tells us there's no water in there, but there were scorpions and snakes in there. Right? So now, okay, so what's Reuven doing? So he's saving him from the humans, but he's throwing him into this pit with snakes and scorpions. So what does it mean that he saved him? So the Or Chaim HaKadosh, the commentary Or Chaim, who lived in the 1800s, primarily in Yerushalayim, he's known as HaKadosh. He was so spiritual and so holy that the name HaKadosh was put to him. Not too many throughout our history, the name HaKadosh was added to them. Right? He says something fascinating and opens up another very interesting philosophical discussion. Right? Could my free will kill someone else? Can I use my free will to kill someone that's not deserving to be killed, or to hurt someone that's not deserving to be killed? It's up in heaven, this person's clean, he's clear, he hasn't done any transgressions. That's beautiful. Most of us do some form of transgression, right? But this person's, he has no, in the heavenly court, this has no decree for anything to happen. Can my free will go ahead and hurt him? Right? Can my free will go ahead and kill him? There's a machlokas, there's a disagreement amongst the rabbis, the rabbis about this. There are, most opinions hold that no, can't. Right? My free will goes up to a certain point. God will put someone that is deserving to be killed in front of me. If I have a desire to kill someone, then I'll have an option to exercise my free will or not. Right? But if this person is someone that is clean, he has no averot, he has nothing that the Beis Shamal, the heavenly court, has a warrant out for his demise, right? But God is merciful, so God gives us time to repent, and that's why we're still alive. Right? And if every time we did something we'll be struck down, we would have no free will either, because then we see the hand of God, right? But God is merciful. I know myself. I'm no righteous person. King Solomon says, not a righteous person in the world that doesn't sin. Some form of sin that, in theory, if our action was in this world and we get punished for everything that we do, would be in trouble, right? But God is merciful and he doesn't. But God allows, if someone has a desire to kill someone or put someone in, or to hurt someone or to steal from someone, so God would put that person in their path, right? And then I have the ability to exercise my free will or not. But otherwise, I'm not able to hurt someone that's not deserving. The Or Chaim HaKadosh and many and others disagree with this. He said, no, I have a free will. I have a free will. So even if someone's not deserving to it at all, right? My free will is still, what's going to happen? He'll come up to heaven. God will work it out. His neshama could come back. I don't know. These are beyond my scope of understanding. I don't know. Right? I'll pick it up with God. Right? God could figure out. He could figure out what to do. But in theory, a person has a free will to exercise and to do something, right, that is not deserving. So says there Or Chaim HaKadosh, he says that's how we can understand these verses. Reuven was skeptical if Yosef is really deserving the death penalty. As we said, they felt he did. He felt that he was a road if he was running after them. Other things that he did, they felt that he deserved. He did actions that deserved halachically deserved the death penalty, and that's why they were going to throw him and kill him. Right? Reuven was skeptical. He wasn't sure. Right? He wasn't sure. He hears the debate back and forth. He wasn't sure. So he said like this. He said, us humans, we have the ability to hurt someone and to kill someone, even though he's not deserving. Right? But if I throw him into a pit, Yes, there's snakes and scorpions, but then now he's in the hands of God, because snakes and scorpions can only do the will of Hashem. They don't have any free will. They only do what Hashem wants. So yes, it's in their nature to go ahead and to bite and to hurt, right, and to kill, right? But their nature can only go to the extent of if the person is deserving of this punishment. If Yosef really is a tzaddik, and we are all mistaken, so he'll be fine in the pit. Right? And therefore I'm saving him. And not only am I saving him, I'm proving that he's right. Right? But if Yosef's if I'm wrong, if Yosef really deserves it, then he'll die in the pit, right? Because he deserves it anyways, right? So why should we put our hands, and that's the words he says, right? He says, don't spill blood. Don't put it into our hands to spill the blood, because we have the ability to spill blood when it's not deserving to spill blood. Right? We have the ability to spill blood when it's not deserving to spill blood. So why should we do that? Send him into the bar, right? And then we'll see what happens with him. Right? We'll see what happens with him. And he believed that he wasn't deserving. He said, "I'll bring him back to our father later." Right? So, but this is a fascinating disagreement, right? That makes shows up in this story. The other opinions have a way of explaining this a different way, right? The Chaim feels, and from this week's Parsha, he says this is a proof to what we believe, right? That we do have the ability to, God forbid, hurt someone even if they're not deserving. And that's how he explains this episode of why Reuven threw him into a pit when the Torah tells us he tried to save him. He didn't try to save him. And there's scorpions and snakes in there. That's what he says. That's what it means. Try to save him, right? To prove that he is righteous and that he doesn't deserve it. So then the scorpions and snakes won't hurt him, and that's why should we use our own hands? So again, a very interesting philosophical discussion, right? That's brought out from this week's parsha and gives another clarity into this story with Reuven of why Reuven threw him in, even though the Torah says that he tried to save him. Any questions or comments on this? When they took him out. Right, that's a good question. Right, that's a great question. So the answer to that could be, right, is that they felt that maybe he was able to, fend them off, or he put his clothes around him, or it's a good question. I don't have a good answer to that, right? But they felt that wasn't enough, and maybe that's what Yehuda said. We can't kill him. Let's send them into slavery instead, right? That's why it could be that's why Yehuda then stepped up and said, let's take him out of here, right? Okay, they didn't kill him, right? But, we're not going to go ahead and kill him now, but we'll send him into slavery to get him out of the way, right? Because we're still sort of up in the air of what to do with him. It's a good question. It's a very good question. I have to look into that. It's a good question. Right, he also didn't have water, right? So we don't know how long he was in there for. It could have been just for a day, it could be less for a day, we don't know how long he was in there. Right? That's a good point. Okay. Okay, so now let's move on, right? And then it says, very interesting, they sold him to the Ishmaelim, verse 27. Right, so verse 27 says like this, right? Let's send him to the Ishmaelim, right? And one second. Sorry, verse 25. It says, and the Ishmaelim came, and they were selling. The Torah goes into details what they were selling. They were selling, right? What were they selling? Right? They're selling spices, right? And all these different kind of spices were selling down to Egypt, right? That's where the Torah goes. So Chaim Shmulevitz and many ask, like, who cares what they were selling? There's not an extra word in the Torah. So who cares what they were selling? Why did the Torah go into details in telling us what they were selling? Right? So Rav Chaim Shmulevitz famously says something very important, very powerful, ties into the Hanukkah story, which sometimes Parshah Vayeshev is Shabbos Hanukkah, not this year, right? This year it's next week's Parsha, right? But it's right before Hanukkah, but it ties into the Hanukkah story. It says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz that that usually the Ishmaelim, the Medrash tells us, Rashi quotes the Medrash that answers this question. It says because usually they carry bad smell, tar and bad smelling stuff. But Hashem, the Torah is telling us that this time Hashem made a miracle that they had a different shipment. They actually had, it was odd, but they had good smelling spices in their shipment, right? So that Yosef doesn't have to smell bad smelling stuff, right? That Yosef didn't have to smell bad. So, Asher Chaim Shmulevitz, thank you very much. Okay, so we answered one difficult question, but we have another difficult question. You think Yosef really cares that there's good smelling stuff when his brothers sold him to slavery and now he's in chains and his own family, his own brothers, right, ripped off his coat, right, is making him like dead, right, and selling him to slavery? You think he's thinking about the what's the good smelling stuff or bad smelling stuff? You think that's really on his mind right now? That's what's on his mind? Torah is telling us, look, Hashem made a miracle, right? It's good smelling stuff and not bad smelling stuff. Really? Like, who cares? Yosef being sold to Mitzrayim. That's Rav Chaim Shmulevitz. Something such an important lesson that we have to find these things are in our lives all the time. Says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz that Yosef recognized, Yosef realized, and even with all his hardship and all his difficulties, Hashem was telling him, "I'm with you." It was like a code that I'm watching over you, even in your hardship, even in your difficulty, even when you're being sold into slavery, even when your brothers, right, sold you into slavery, and you're being stripped of all your rights. I'm with you, because look, I made a miracle. If it's a small one, but I made a miracle. I'm taking away a little bit of your pain. At least you won't have to smell bad smelling stuff your whole way down. You can smell good smelling stuff. I'm with you. It's a sign of love. It's a sign of that Hashem is with us wherever we are, right? And we find this many times if you stop to think about our lives, even in difficult times, right? Something happened, but someone's here to help. It's a small little gesture, a small little thing. It doesn't really fix the whole situation, but it gives us a little comfort during that time. Someone's there, or someone's watching you, whatever it is, right? There's some form of comfort. Right? Even though the overall thing is like, I'm drowning, right? But there's little comfort. That's Hashem there. Hashem is telling us, I'm going to sprinkle that little good smelling stuff to watch over you. And that says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, it's like a kiss on the forehead. Hashem is telling us, I'm with you wherever you are. Right? It says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, I'm not going to get into the whole Hanukkah thing, right? But it says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz that's the same thing with the Hanukkah story, right? Why did Hashem make the miracle of the oil? If there's not enough oil, there's not enough oil, right? So I don't have enough oil. I can't light the Hanukkah. What did they do the last, few years before they won the war? They didn't light the menorah, right? They didn't have access to it. They didn't light the menorah. So so they have oil for one day. So you'll have it, and then you make the oil, and then you light it. It's like, what was the necessity of Hashem to make this miracle? And it wasn't a necessity, so it wasn't like something that they had to have. And to win the war, they needed to win the war because otherwise they wouldn't be able to, practice Judaism again, and that needs it. But the oil, what was the necessity of the oil? Rav Chaim Shmulevitz is the same thing. Kadosh Baruch Hu made the miracle of oil as a kiss on the forehead. It wasn't needed. But he's telling the Jewish people that I'm proud of you, I'm with you. This menorah, the candle that lights up, is compared to our neshama, that lights up the darkness, that represents spirituality. That's what the menorah represents, right? The Torah. I'm with you. As I'm saying, I'm with you wherever you are. I'm going to make a miracle and last for 8 days, that you can have the menorah lit during the whole time until new oil comes in. It wasn't necessary, right? But I'm going to make that miracle, right, to show you that I'm with you. And then the same thing in exile, which the menorah represents lighting up the darkness. Hanukkah is the darkest time of the year, right, representing the darkest exiles that we've ever been in, right? There's always a flicker of hope. There's always something there, right, for us to grapple, to pick on, to find. We have time to find it, right? But Hashem is there always to ensure our success, our salvation, or at least the nation's salvation. And that's what he was doing over here with Yosef, right? The same, I'm with you. It's hard, but I'm with you. Okay, let's move on. We're running out of time. Okay, so we're going to jump. We're going to jump to Yosef gets sold to Mitzrayim. We're going to jump to page 208, chapter 35, verse 1. I'm not going to go through the whole. Again, we sort of gave a whole overview. I just want to speak about one thing. And it says, Vayihi be'esahi vayered Yehuda me'esach. Yehuda went down from his brothers, and that's what he said. He left the family, he sort of self-imposed exile, and then it speaks about the whole story that we spoke about, right, with him marrying the lady, having the children, and everything that we spoke about before. Right, that's what I just wanted to give an overview before. But the commentaries say something very interesting. Vayered Yehuda, Yehuda went down. Right, not only did he go down literally, like he went, maybe they were in Hebron or whatever, it was on the mountain, and he went down a mountain. Right, but it's a weird word. It says Vayered Yehuda, and Yehuda went. What does it mean Vayered? He went down. He says that Yehuda put himself. He lowered himself in status also. He took the responsibility. He was the leader, right? His father couldn't console himself, right? He realized he made a mistake, right? And he took the responsibility, right? And he said, I have to take a side. I'm not going to blame it on anybody else, right? I'm not going to blame it on this brother and on that brother and this and that. He took a self-imposed exile and said, I can't lead you right now. I have to reflect on myself. I have to look internally at myself. Right? I'm not going to just plow ahead and say, okay, I'm still the leader and whatever, and blame other people and have scapegoats, as we call it. Right? He took the responsibility and he moved forward. And Vayer, so he went down, means to say he went down in the status of sort of the leader of his brothers, and he had a self-imposed exile. And that's a tremendous character trait of Yehuda. That's a character trait of a leader, and that's why we'll see in a minute also, that's why King David came from Yehuda, and Mashiach comes from Yehuda, because this is a character trait that we find where he took responsibility and then blame other people, right, and realized when he needed to take a second and reflect and realize his ways, right. That is a sign of a leader. A leader can't be someone that is always finding a way to loopholes. My fault is this, and I was just really saving him, and I was just trying to save him from you guys, and this was really better than you guys killing him. And he could have made a whole political thing and scapegoating other people, and he could have looked good. Right? No, he took responsibility, and that's a sign of a leader. Then there's the whole story, as we mentioned. I just want to pick on one more thing from this story. Later on, at verse 25 and 26, right? So as we said, right? Tamar said, whoever the stick is, the staff is, and the seal is, right? That's the one that I gave birth to, right? That's the one that I had relations with, right? So the commentaries say, why don't you just say, Yehuda is you? I'm like, hello, right? It was you. Why don't you say, whoever these things are, that's, right? So Rashi famously quotes the Talmud, tremendous lesson, is, Tov listruf lebes kishin. It's better to be thrown into a burning furnace than to mevayis pnei chavei b'rabim, to embarrass someone else in public, right? It's better to be thrown into a burning furnace than to be embarrass someone else in public. And therefore, she didn't want to embarrass him in public. She could have said, Yehuda, it's you, right? But she felt you're not allowed to. You can't embarrass someone in public, even if your own life's on the line, right? So she said, whoever these stuff are, that's who it is. Now, it's up to him to decide what to do with it, right? But this is a tremendous lesson. We might not be holding on that level of throwing ourselves into a burning furnace, right, to put our lives on the line, but to show how important is not to embarrass someone else, how careful we have to be, right? We spoke about this last week, about hurting someone, right, with Yosef, right, and listen to the recording, right, the sensitivity, even though Yaakov was right, but still Yosef got slighted. This even more so, embarrassing someone in public, calling someone out in public, right? Sometimes it's very delicate sometimes for the community if someone is doing something that people are learning from, right, and acting and following in his ways. And then, yes, there might be a time when you have to call the person out in public, that people should realize that this is the wrong thing and they shouldn't be following him, because that person's called a chotem machtas. Around the person is sitting himself and making other people shouldn't like him, right? But that's a very odd case, right? But 90% of the time, someone does something wrong, you go over to them quietly, you speak to them privately, right? Find the right way of doing it. Do it in a sort of a hinting way. I don't call a person, really? You did that? You went into that place? You went, blah, 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 blah. You can't embarrass someone in public, right? You can't do that. It's just not. And we have to be careful. Parents with kids, right? With kids, with siblings, with other siblings. It's more common. Co-workers, bosses with workers, right? Yes, they did something wrong. So call them to office. Don't like scream, "Hey, Jack, why do you mess up that whatever?" Right? And the whole office hears. Right? That's wrong. That's wrong. It's halachically wrong. You're not allowed to do that. Right? It doesn't make a difference what power you're in. What doesn't make a difference what position you are. You can't embarrass someone else, and that's what we learn from Tamar. This tremendous lesson. Vice versa. So what's the next verse? It says, Vayakar Yehuda, Yehuda recognized it. Vayomer, he said, Sadka mimeni, she is more righteous than me. She is right. Right? Yalkein said he saw because I didn't get my son, and then it goes through the whole thing. She was right, and he recognized and he said, it's mine, and move on. Let's say back to Yehuda. Yehuda taking responsibility and realizing when he was wrong. He was a leader. He was a judge of the people there, right? He was a head judge, right? Imagine a situation, right? This person comes in. I'll just keep quiet. I won't look. Okay, I won't get embarrassed, right? Anyways, whatever, right? People think she's wrong. No, stop telling me, he said it out like she is right. She is more righteous than I am. And I'm responsible. She did the right thing, and it's mine, and we're good. Oh, embarrassment, the tabloids, and this and that, the Instagram posts, the Twitter feeds, and everything. Oh my God, it's crazy. But that's taking responsibility for your actions and realizing when you're wrong, and not just trying to shove it up. Again, that's a sign of a leader, and then that's another lesson that we learn from Yehuda. Just a few more things. I know it's already 8 o'clock. Just a few more things, if you could bear with me. All right. So the next chapter, next paragraph, chapter Lamates goes back to Yosef going down to Mitzrayim, and it says, verse 3. It says that he was sold to Potiphar. It says, Vayar Adonov ki Hashem ito, because his master saw that Hashem is with him. Everything that he does, Hashem matzliach, God makes him successful. Right? And then it says that he put him in tent. We find the same thing, same wording when he goes down to as what's it called again? Once he's thrown into jail. Again, the same thing, same language, right? And again, we have to read. The Torah is telling us that Yosef realized and other people realized that this was miraculous. Hashem is the one that gives us success. And that's something that we have to realize every day. We have to realize that whatever success we have, right, whatever in our business, in our lives, in our health, of course, we have to do our effort, and we have to go out, and we have to get customers, and we have to have a good product, and we have to do exercise, and we have to do whatever it is. But at the end of the day, Hashem is the one that gives us tzedakah. Hashem is the one that provides for us. And when we show Hashem that we recognize that, when we show Hashem that we are providing back to his children, his organization, then Hashem's matzliach, Hashem gives us more tzedakah. And that's the words that the Torah is telling us, and that's something that we have to realize, right? That Hashem is the one that gives us all the success that we have, right? And we have to recognize that. When we do recognize that, then Hashem gives us even more. And that's one idea that we learn from here. And again, we don't have time to go through all of it. The other thing I just want to point out, the commentaries tell us that when Yosef was in the house and Potiphar, Yosef is called Yesod, foundation, right? And Yosef, when he ran away. Now think about the situation. He's a slave. There's no one in the house. He knew he was going to get blamed. His mistress is telling him what to do, right? That is tremendous strength to overcome, right? And to run away and say, no, I can't do this, right? Yosef is called foundation because of the foundation that he had from the learning of his father, right? From his the youth of education, and he kept it up. He didn't just rely on it when he was younger, but he kept on learning, kept on growing, and that gave him the strength to overcome. It says that the Midrash tells us, the Talmud tells us that he saw like an image of his father. He didn't really have a mirage and he saw an image of his father, but means to say that he internalized his upbringing, internalized his Judaism to the extent that when he was confronted with the thief, he saw his father, he said, what would your father say? Right? What would your rabbi say? What would your friend say? What would your spouse say? What would your children say? We have to utilize these things when we're in a difficult situation to overcome, and that's what Yosef did. Right? And that's, again, a tremendous lesson for us. We have to strengthen our roots, strengthen our children's roots, right? To make sure that they have strong roots, they have that foundation, they have a good relationship with us, with the rabbi, right? With someone that they could say, what would they say? Of course, what God would say, but to create a physical reality to it, right? That's something that we have to create to help us in situations that we're in, wherever that may be, if it's in college or if it's a business, it's at work, it's on a road trip, right? Wherever we might be, we always have difficulties here at home. We always have difficulties, and that's something we have to think about. We'll just finish with all the way at the end of the parsha, right? As we said, right, that Yosef asked the Shar Mashkim, right? Yosef asked the head of the wine, right? To what's it called again? To remember him and to tell Paro about his situation. The last verse of this week's Torah portion ends off with a sort of like the most depressing line. He did not remember him and he forgot him. Not only did he not remember him, he forgot him. Yosef is doomed, right? He's stuck in jail, right? And the commentaries explain even more than that, that the next week's parsha starts off that it was 2 years later. He became Shashaim Yom, right? And it's 2 years later. Yosef was really in jail for another 2 years. And on Yosef's level, he was punished, right, for asking the Shar Mashkim to help him. We're talking about Yosef's level. We're not holding on that level. But Yosef sort of had faith that the Shar Mashkim would have told him, or Hashem would take care of him, right? That Hashem has been taking care of him until now, right? So why are you putting your faith in a human hand, right? Now, for us, that is considered a status. That's considered the proper thing. We're not holding on such a high spiritual level of faith in Hashem. But on Yosef's level, it was. Right? But again, something for us to reflect on. We have to realize that we have to have this balance and realize that Hashem is who takes care of us. Hashem who provides for us. Hashem is the one that gives us health. We have to do our shtadlus and we have to do our effort based off whatever level we're holding. Right? As we grow, our emunah to be stronger, right? Our faith to be stronger. But that's something to reflect on and to think about. That this is always a challenge, but the bottom line is that we have to realize that everything that we have is from Hashem. Right? Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.